McMurdo Sound, Antarctica, has long been considered one of the most extreme environments for scientific research on Earth. In February 2020, this remote paradise became the setting for one of the most harrowing encounters between humans and predators documented in polar waters. Dr. Amelia Riordan, a 34-year-old marine biologist specializing in polar plankton blooms, had spent 3 Antarctic summers at the McMurdo Research Station. The Australian scientist had earned a reputation for meticulous work documenting how climate change affected microscopic marine life cycles in the Southern Ocean. Her current research focused on how declining sea ice could trigger earlier plankton blooms, with cascading effects throughout the food web. On February 12, 2020, Riordan and her dive partner, Norwegian oceanographer Dr. Christian Bergman, prepared for a routine collection dive beneath the ice shelf, approximately 3 kilometers from the main research station. Both were experienced polar divers with over 40 combined Antarctic expeditions between them. The morning began with standard safety briefings and equipment checks. Their dive supervisor, Canadian researcher Dr. Isabelle Tremblay, verified their thermal protection suits, emergency signaling devices, and backup air supplies. The team had followed this exact protocol dozens of times before. Support technicians, Xavier Quintana and Weilin Chen, crewed the surface station, constantly communicating with the divers. At 9:17 a.m., Riordan and Bergman descended through a meticulously cut ice hole, 1.5 meters in diameter. The opening had been created the previous day using specialized ice drills and kept clear overnight. Surface temperatures hovered around -15 degrees Celsius. In comparison, the water beneath the 2-meter-thick ice shelf maintained a relatively constant -1.8 degrees Celsius, just above the freezing point of seawater. The dive plan called for the scientists to collect plankton samples at varying depths, with a maximum descent to 30 meters and a total bottom time not exceeding 40 minutes. Both divers carried specialized cameras to document the underwater conditions and any notable marine life. 23 minutes into the dive, Riordan was photographing a particularly rich plankton concentration at 25 meters when she noticed a dark shadow moving at the periphery of her vision. Before she could alert Bergman, who was collecting samples several meters away, an enormous leopard seal, later estimated to be 3 meters long and weighing approximately 500 kilograms, charged her with explosive speed. Leopard seals, known for their spotted coats and fearsome predatory nature, were among Antarctica's apex predators. Their powerful jaws, designed for hunting penguins and filtering krill, could exert tremendous pressure. What made them particularly dangerous was their curious and sometimes aggressive behavior toward unfamiliar objects in their territory. The seal's initial pass seemed investigatory, rather than predatory. It circled Riordan once, then disappeared into the gloom. The biologist immediately signaled to Bergman that they had company, using the predetermined hand signal for a potential predator encounter. They began a controlled movement toward their exit point, maintaining visual contact. 30 seconds later, the seal returned with startling aggression. It charged directly at Riordan, grabbing her right fin in its powerful jaws and yanking with such force that the fin was completely torn from her foot. The sudden jolt sent her spiraling in the near-zero visibility stirred up by the attack. As she struggled to regain her orientation, the seal circled back. This time, it clamped onto her right arm, which held her expensive underwater camera housing. The leopard seal bit down with crushing force, whether attracted by the camera's reflective surface or simply targeting the outstretched limb. The reinforced housing initially protected Riordan's arm from complete severing, but the pressure fractured both her radius and ulna. Using her left hand, she struck at the seal's sensitive snout with the camera housing, a desperate move that likely saved her life as the animal momentarily released its grip. Bergman, witnessing the attack, activated his emergency strobe light, creating rapid pulses of intense light that disoriented the predator just long enough for him to reach his colleague. The water around them had already begun to cloud with blood from Riordan's injuries. Using his powerful legs, Bergman kicked toward the ice hole, pulling Riordan alongside him. The leopard seal circled beneath them, making several more passes but not attacking again, behavior that marine mammal experts would later attribute to the confusion caused by the strobe light and the unfamiliar taste of the neoprene and equipment. The pair ascended through their entry hole at 9:43 a.m., with Bergman pushing Riordan ahead of him while maintaining vigilant watch below. Support technicians Chen and Quintana immediately pulled them from the water onto the ice shelf, where the stark white surface was quickly stained crimson with Riordan's blood. Emergency protocols were immediately initiated. Tremblay applied a pressure bandage to Riordan's mangled arm, while Chen radioed for emergency transport. A specially equipped cold-weather medical transport arrived from the main station within 12 minutes. Dr. Yasmin Kapoor, the station's senior medical officer, stabilized Reardon in the field before transferring her to the research station's medical facility. Initial assessment revealed multiple deep puncture wounds to Reardon's right arm, a compound fracture of both forearm bones, and significant soft tissue damage to her right foot, where the fin had been forcibly removed. While no major arteries had been severed, the collective blood loss and the onset of hypothermia placed her in critical condition. The remote location complicated medical evacuation efforts. Weather conditions prohibited immediate airlift to Christchurch, New Zealand. For 68 hours, Dr. Kapoor and the station's medical team worked to stabilize Reardon's condition, performing 2 emergency surgeries to clean and close her wounds and set her broken bones with external fixators. When conditions finally allowed evacuation on February 15th, Reardon was transported to a hospital in Christchurch, where she underwent an additional 4 surgeries over 2 weeks. While surgeons saved her arm, she would never regain full mobility in her right wrist and hand, a devastating outcome for a scientist who performed delicate microscope work. The incident prompted a comprehensive review of polar diving protocols across all international research stations in Antarctica. The investigation concluded that while the attack could not have been reasonably predicted, additional predator deterrent devices should be mandatory for all science divers working in leopard seal territories. The International Polar Research Consortium subsequently mandated using acoustic seal deterrents and enhanced predator awareness training for all permitted diving operations. Dr. Bergman, who had pulled his colleague to safety despite the ongoing danger, received the Polar Medal for his actions. In his acceptance speech, he deflected praise, noting that Reardon's quick thinking in striking the seal's sensitive nose had been the true life-saving moment, a testament to proper predator response training. For Reardon, the physical and psychological recovery proved lengthy but ultimately transformative. After 6 months of intensive rehabilitation, she returned to academic work, though she never again dove beneath Antarctic ice. Instead, she redirected her research focus to analyze the samples collected during that fateful dive, which had, ironically, captured evidence of significant changes in the plankton community structure that would prove crucial to understanding climate impacts on the Antarctic food web. The leopard seal responsible for the attack was identified through distinctive facial scarring, documented in Reardon's camera footage recovered after the incident. Marine mammal researchers noted it was an unusually large female that had been previously observed displaying territorial behavior toward other seals. The animal was not destroyed but was tagged with a tracking device during the following research season, providing valuable data on leopard seal movement patterns and hunting territories. When interviewed a year later for a scientific journal, Reardon expressed no animosity toward the animal or the environment that had nearly claimed her life. She emphasized that entering such remote and primal ecosystems always carried inherent risks that no preparation could eliminate. Her paper on the physiological responses of researchers to traumatic wildlife encounters became required reading at polar training centers worldwide. The blood-stained ice at the dive site melted away with the coming of the Antarctic summer, leaving no trace of the encounter. Yet for the tight-knit community of polar researchers, the incident served as a humbling reminder that Antarctica's beauty concealed ancient, untamed dangers, predators perfected by evolution for an environment where humans remain temporary visitors, tolerated rather than welcomed by the true masters of the polar depths. Rains had pounded Beira for 6 days, turning dry streets into sluggish rivers and soccer fields into lakes. Storm drains overflowed. The Pungwe River burst its banks, and the entire fringe of the city looked like the sea had swallowed it. To the local kids it was chaos, but also adventure. Samuel was 15, lean and wiry, with a bold streak that often landed him in trouble. Just east of the city's outskirts, his neighborhood sat close to the floodplain. He had grown up watching the annual floods reshape the land, used to seeing water creep past the houses, fill the gullies, and submerge playgrounds. When the soccer field at the end of his street disappeared beneath a foot of water, it became an irresistible swimming hole. The rain had paused that afternoon, though gray clouds still hung overhead. The air was thick and wet, and Samuel and 4 friends waded through knee-deep currents and debris-strewn water to reach the old soccer field. The goalposts were barely visible, their top bars peaking like broken bones. The water was brown and opaque, full of runoff, branches, plastic, and swirling trash. They laughed as they splashed, throwing chunks of soaked grass at each other, diving under the surface, daring one another to swim the full length of the flooded pitch. The current was slow but steady, pulling gently eastward, and no one noticed how far they'd strayed toward the deeper corner, where the old drainage ditch fed into the field. Samuel swam out first, powering through the thick, warm water, enjoying the resistance against his arms. He was a strong swimmer, faster than the rest, always eager to lead. Pulling ahead, he felt something hard brush against his leg, but dismissed it as a submerged branch. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the flood had brought more than garbage. The swollen Pungwe had carried fish inland, pushed them into alleys, flooded yards, and shallow lakes. And following those fish was a bull shark. It had likely prowled the brackish estuary when the flood surge pulled it inland. Unlike most sharks, bull sharks could thrive in salt and fresh water, and during the monsoon season, they sometimes ventured far upriver or into floodplains chasing fish and carrion. The debris-choked water gave perfect cover, and the vibrations of the boys splashing were indistinct but unmistakable, erratic, panicked, like wounded prey. The attack happened in seconds. Samuel had just kicked forward when he felt a sudden, massive jolt. Something slammed into his right side, fast and solid, followed instantly by blinding pain in his upper arm. Before he could cry out, he was yanked beneath the surface, twisting violently as the water around him exploded in bubbles. His friend saw the commotion and froze. The water frothed, then turned red. A panicked scream rose as they saw Samuel reappear, thrashing, his body jerking unnaturally. One of the boys ran into the water, gripping his shoulder and dragging him toward the shallow end, while the others backed away in horror. The water stank of blood and mud. Samuel's right arm was a mess of shredded flesh and exposed bone, muscle torn open along the bicep. His face was pale and contorted in shock, but he was conscious, gasping, eyes wild with fear and pain. The bite had been brutal, but not fatal. Only one pass, the shark hitting high and fast, then vanishing into the murk. They pulled him to dry ground, screaming for help. Adults ran from nearby homes, rushing through ankle-deep water as someone called for aid. A volunteer paramedic team stationed nearby in a flood relief tent responded, arriving within 10 minutes with a stretcher. Samuel was pale, bleeding heavily, and beginning to slip out of awareness. The medic tied a tourniquet just below the shoulder and covered the arm in gauze soaked with antiseptic. He was rushed in a utility truck to a field hospital set up on higher ground near the port. Doctors worked quickly. The bite had exposed muscle and severed tendons, but arteries had been narrowly missed. He received a blood transfusion, underwent emergency surgery to repair damaged tissue, and was kept in a makeshift recovery ward. By the next day, he was stable. The incident spread quickly. Rumors flew about crocodiles or spirits in the water, but local marine biologists arrived to clarify. Based on the shape and angle of the bite, wide, crescent-shaped with deep punctures, they confirmed it had come from a bull shark, likely around 2 meters long. They explained that bull sharks often entered rivers during the wet season, and when extreme floods occurred, the boundaries between river and city blurred. The stagnant pools and floodwaters, full of fish and food waste, became accidental hunting grounds. It wasn't the first time. A fisherman near Chinde had been bitten in a similar flood 2 years earlier, but this attack was different. It had happened in an urban zone where children played, not where professionals worked. The government issued immediate warnings against swimming in floodwaters, and search teams patrolled flood zones in boats, keeping eyes open for further shark movement. Authorities considered erecting temporary fencing near key drainage zones to prevent marine life from entering suburban areas. Though with the flood still rising, there were no guarantees. Samuel stayed in the hospital for over a week. He didn't speak much during the first few days. The trauma lingered, deeper than the wound. He would startle when water dripped from a ceiling or wind slapped tarps around the tents. But slowly, he recovered. Doctors said he would regain arm use, though not full strength. When he returned home, his friends greeted him with nervous smiles and relief. The flooded field was still underwater, but now it was avoided, a silent, muddy reminder that the floodwaters were no playground. Samuel's story was retold by parents, teachers, and aid workers as a warning. The boy who survived the flood shark. A living reminder that the ocean's predators don't always wait offshore, that sometimes they follow the rivers, slip between streets, and strike where no one expects them. And for years afterward, when the rains returned and the water rose, those who remembered stayed away from the field because they knew what had once lurked beneath. The islands, located 27 miles off the coast of San Francisco, had gained a reputation as the Red Triangle among marine biologists and shark researchers. These rocky outcrops served as breeding grounds for northern elephant seals and harbor seals, creating an abundant food source that attracted the largest concentration of great white sharks along the Pacific coast. In September 2019, this natural predator-prey relationship would nearly claim the life of wildlife photographer Matt Kerensky. Matt, a 34-year-old freelance photographer from Portland, Oregon, had spent the better part of 5 years documenting marine wildlife behavior. His work involved capturing intimate moments between apex predators and their prey. The assignment that brought him to the islands promised to be his most ambitious yet, photographing great white sharks during their peak feeding season, using revolutionary underwater camera technology. The research vessel Neptune's Dream had been chartered specifically for this expedition, equipped with state-of-the-art hydrophones, underwater cameras, and most importantly, a realistic seal-shaped decoy system designed to attract sharks for close-range photography. The decoy, crafted from high-density foam and covered in seal skin texture, could be towed behind the boat at variable speeds to mimic wounded prey behavior. Dr. Sarah Chen, the expedition's marine biologist, had initially expressed reservations about the decoy system. Her research indicated that September represented peak hunting season for adult great whites, with water temperatures and seal populations creating optimal feeding conditions. However, Matt's insurance company had approved the methodology, and his previous work with similar techniques in South Africa had yielded spectacular results without incident. The morning of September 23rd found Neptune's Dream anchored in the channel, with visibility extending nearly 40 feet underwater. Calm seas and moderate swells created perfect conditions for photography. Matt positioned himself on the boat's portside pontoon, his camera equipment secured with safety lines, and his wetsuit providing protection against the 58-degree water temperature. The decoy deployment began at 8:15 a.m., with the foam seal being towed approximately 50 meters behind the vessel at depths varying between 5 and 15 feet. Matt's underwater cameras, mounted on extendable arms, captured the decoy's realistic movement patterns as it mimicked an injured seal's erratic swimming behavior. Initial results proved encouraging, with several smaller sharks investigating the decoy from a distance. Matt documented blue sharks and a single mako shark approaching within 20 feet of the artificial prey. But the massive great whites that the islands were famous for remained elusive during the morning hours. At 11:43 a.m., the expedition's luck changed dramatically. Hydrophone recordings detected the distinctive low-frequency sounds associated with large predator movement, and underwater cameras revealed a massive shadow approaching from the depths. Matt positioned himself as far forward on the pontoon as safety protocols allowed. His camera equipment extended into the water to capture what promised to be extraordinary footage. The great white shark that emerged from the depths measured an estimated 3.5 meters in length, its scarred hide and massive girth indicating an adult female in peak condition. The predator approached the decoy with the calculated precision that had made great whites the ocean's most efficient hunters, circling twice before positioning itself for an attack run. Matt focused intently on his camera viewfinder, adjusting exposure settings to compensate for the changing light conditions as the shark prepared to breach. His concentration on capturing the perfect shot caused him to lean farther over the pontoon's edge than standard safety protocols recommended, his silhouette creating a shadow pattern on the water surface that resembled prey behavior. The attack occurred with terrifying speed at 11:47 a.m. Instead of targeting the intended decoy, the great white surged upward toward Matt's extended position. Its massive head broke the surface directly beneath him, jaws agape and displaying rows of serrated teeth, each measuring over 2 inches in length. The shark's powerful jaws clamped down on Matt's right forearm with crushing force, the impact pulling him partially over the pontoon's edge and into the water. He later described the sensation as being caught in a mechanical press, with the shark's teeth penetrating through his wetsuit and deep into muscle tissue. The predator's weight, combined with its thrashing motion, threatened to drag him completely overboard. Matt's screams alerted the crew immediately. Though the attack's duration lasted only 8 seconds, the shark released its grip as suddenly as it had struck, apparently recognizing that its prey differed significantly from expected seal characteristics. Blood immediately began clouding the water around the boat as Matt was hauled back aboard by expedition members. Dr. Chen and the boat's first aid specialist worked frantically to control the bleeding from multiple puncture wounds along Matt's forearm. The shark's teeth had missed major arteries, but had severed several tendons and caused extensive muscle damage. Emergency bandages and a makeshift tourniquet fashioned from camera straps helped stabilize his condition during the 40-minute journey back to mainland emergency services. Coast Guard helicopters met the Neptune's Dream and transported Matt to a trauma center, where surgeons spent 6 hours repairing tendon damage and removing embedded tooth fragments. The attack resulted in partial loss of grip strength in his right hand, effectively ending his career as a handheld wildlife photographer. The incident led to revised safety protocols for SEAL decoy photography, including mandatory safety harnesses and increased distance requirements between photographers and active hunting zones. Matt eventually transitioned to remote camera operation, continuing his wildlife documentation career while serving as a cautionary example of how quickly calculated risks could transform into life-threatening encounters with nature's most formidable predators. The Tempisque River, winding through Costa Rica's northwestern Guanacaste province, had long served as an ecological treasure and a vital resource for local communities. The muddy waterway supported diverse wildlife and provided cooling relief for riverside towns like Philadelphia, where temperatures routinely soared above 35 degrees Celsius during the dry season. For generations, locals had swum in these waters without incident, their greatest concerns being occasional crocodile sightings in more remote sections. Few residents realized that the river harbored another, more unusual predator capable of navigating between salt and fresh water, a fact that would forever change the community's relationship with their river. On April 9, 2016. That Saturday afternoon was particularly scorching, even by local standards. Midday, the temperature had reached 38 degrees, and humidity hung heavy in the still air. For the teenagers of Philadelphia, the wooden dock behind Doña Carmela's riverside restaurant had become an unofficial gathering spot, offering a convenient launch point for swimming and respite from the oppressive heat. 16-year-old Esteban Rodriguez Mendez, a popular soccer player from the local secondary school, arrived at the dock around 2:30 p.m. with his friends Miguel Ángel Gutiérrez and Valeria Sánchez Rojas. Others soon joined them: 14-year-old twins Catalina and Carolina Mendoza, 17-year-old Javier Arturo Campos, and several younger children who remained on the dock under the watchful eye of Valeria's grandmother, Lucia Rojas. The teens noticed the water appeared murkier than usual. Heavy rains had fallen in the highlands 3 days earlier, and the river carried more sediment than normal. None of them knew that the same rainfall had also temporarily raised oxygen levels and lowered salinity much farther downstream than usual, creating ideal conditions for a predator rarely encountered this far inland. Around 3:15 p.m., as the afternoon heat intensified, Esteban performed an elaborate backflip from the dock, drawing cheers from his friends. Moments after he surfaced, his expression changed from exhilaration to confusion, then terror. Witnesses later reported that he had time to shout only once before being pulled under by an unseen force. When he resurfaced seconds later, the water around him had already turned crimson. Not comprehending what was happening, Miguel immediately jumped in to help his friend. As he reached Esteban, something massive struck his leg, opening a deep gash from knee to ankle. Both boys began thrashing in the bloodied water as realization dawned on those watching from the dock. Javier Campos, who had been swimming nearby, later reported seeing a large gray-brown shape circling back toward his friends. With remarkable presence of mind for his age, he shouted warnings to the others still in the water while swimming rapidly toward the 2 injured boys. On shore, Lucia Rojas had already begun screaming for help. Her cries alerted Francisco Paco Jimenez, a local fisherman who had been repairing nets behind his nearby home. Grabbing a wooden pole and shouting for his son Diego to bring their small aluminum boat, Paco raced toward the dock where chaos was unfolding. By this time, Javier had reached his injured friends and attempted to pull Esteban toward the shoreline. The effort was complicated by the current, Esteban's injuries, and the ongoing threat of the predator, which continued circling at a distance of approximately 5 meters. Despite his injuries, Miguel was attempting to swim independently toward shore. Paco and Diego reached the scene in their boat less than 2 minutes later. Using the pole to ward off what he immediately recognized as a bull shark, Paco managed to pull Esteban into the ship while Diego helped Miguel aboard. Javier climbed in unassisted, and they sped to the concrete boat ramp 50 meters downstream, where neighbors had already gathered, alerted by the commotion. Esteban had suffered catastrophic injuries. The bull shark's initial attack had torn through his abdominal wall and left thigh, causing massive blood loss and shock. Miguel's injuries, while severe, were limited to his left calf, where the shark's teeth had sliced through muscle but missed major arteries. An impromptu convoy of pickup trucks transported the boys to the regional clinic in Santa Cruz, 20 minutes away. Despite the efforts of Dr. Gabriela Soto and her medical team, Esteban died from blood loss and organ damage shortly after arrival. Miguel underwent emergency surgery followed by transfer to a hospital in the capital, San Jose, where specialized microsurgeons worked to repair the extensive damage to his leg. After months of rehabilitation, Miguel regained partial mobility, but was left with permanent nerve damage and muscle loss that ended his dreams of following his father into construction work. The psychological trauma proved equally devastating. He developed a severe phobia of water and required extensive therapy to overcome intrusive flashbacks of the attack. Marine biologist Dr. Rafael Montero investigated the attack in the days following it. Based on bite patterns, witness descriptions, and the unusual location, he confirmed the attacker had been a bull shark, Carcharhinus lucus, one of the few species capable of regulating its body chemistry to survive in freshwater environments. Dr. Montero determined that several environmental factors had created a perfect storm scenario. The recent heavy rains flushed farm waste and fish processing byproducts from downstream facilities into the river system. These organic materials, combined with altered salinity levels and higher oxygen content, had likely attracted the shark far upriver from its usual estuarine habitat. Local authorities responded by implementing a river monitoring program and installing warning systems along popular swimming areas. Buoys with flags were placed at key points, green indicating safe conditions, yellow for caution, and red signaling potential danger based on water conditions and recent reports. The relationship with their river was permanently altered for the Philadelphia community. Older residents recalled stories their grandparents had told of similar incidents in the 1940s, tales that had faded into local legend rather than been preserved as cautionary history. One elderly fisherman poetically but grimly remarked to a visiting journalist, "The river tasted blood that day for the first time in decades, and now it remembers what we foolishly forgot." A simple concrete memorial now stands near the dock where Esteban took his final swim. Each year on the anniversary of the attack, local students release biodegradable paper boats with candles downstream, both in remembrance of their lost friend and as a symbolic acknowledgement that humans share the waters with creatures far older and more perfectly adapted to river life than themselves. Rain had fallen for days across the Louisiana coast, and the rivers had long since spilled into streets, neighborhoods, and bayous, turning entire towns into floating mazes of rooftops, treetops, and broken fences. Helicopters circled low over submerged communities, their blades churning the heavy, humid air as rescue crews worked non-stop to locate stranded families and deliver them to safety. On the fourth day of operations, a United States Coast Guard MH-60 Jayhawk hovered near a collapsed two-story home surrounded by muddy, debris-choked water. 4 people, a man, a woman, and 2 young children, clung to what was left of a rooftop, waving frantically as the chopper closed in. Inside, Petty Officer Kyle Mason, a rescue swimmer with 10 years of experience, readied himself for a standard vertical insertion. He wore a ballistic flotation vest, a harness rigged to the hoist, and a rescue strap for lifting victims. He had done this dozens of times before through hurricanes, downpours, and gale-force winds. But this water was different. Thick with sediment, oil, and decay, with visibility reduced to almost nothing. What they didn't know, and what no one could have expected, was that dozens of livestock carcasses had been washed into the surrounding bayous after levees failed. Their bloated bodies drifted downstream, attracting predators far inland, including several large bull sharks. Kyle dropped from the helicopter, hitting the warm water with a practiced splash, before adjusting his gear and signaling the hoist operator. He began swimming toward the rooftop, careful to avoid floating furniture and jagged boards sticking out of the water like spears. The family looked terrified but alive, soaked and shivering. Kyle moved with steady, deliberate strokes, calling out over the rotor noise and motioning for the man to prepare for lift. He didn't see the shark coming, not through the brown, debris-filled water that clouded everything below the surface. The bull shark had already been in the area for hours, drawn by blood and decay. It was large, over 7 feet, and aggressive, with powerful jaws and an instinct for ambush. When it struck, it came from Kyle's blind side, just beneath the waterline, lunging with force that felt like being hit by a cinder block. Its teeth found the side of his torso, clamping down across his ribs and lower chest in a bone-crunching bite that sent a shock of pain through his entire body. The ballistic vest slowed the impact, keeping the shark from tearing through completely. But it didn't stop the teeth from punching through the side fabric and sinking deep into his skin and muscle. Kyle thrashed once, hard, more out of reflex than strategy, and the shark released, twisting away with a streak of blood trailing behind. He went under for a second, vision flashing black from the impact, lungs burning before breaking the surface again, gasping as he fought to stay upright. Blood was already clouding the water around him, and his ribs felt broken, like his chest had caved in on one side. But through the pain and the panic, his training kicked in. He had people to save, and the chopper couldn't hold position forever. He shouted for the hoist and waved the sling toward the man on the rooftop, keeping his voice steady despite the blood seeping from beneath his vest. One by one, he got the family into the strop. First the children, then the mother, then the father, keeping himself between them and the open water. He scanned the surface constantly, expecting to see that gray torpedo shape circling back, but it never did. Maybe the shark had gone after something else. Maybe it had just been a warning bite. He couldn't afford to think about it. By the time the final lift was complete, Kyle's strength was fading. The wound beneath his vest throbbed with every heartbeat, and warm blood kept slipping through his fingers every time he pressed against his side. He reached for the cable, fumbling with the harness as the crew lowered the extraction basket. His vision blurred and the chopper's shape seemed to tilt as he tried to focus on the spinning blades above. When he finally collapsed into the basket, he barely felt the lift. Everything hurt, and his thoughts were starting to drift. But he knew the family was safe. That was all that mattered. On board, the flight medic tore open his vest and exposed the wounds. Deep punctures along the ribs, one broken with torn muscle and blood pooling fast. The medic applied pressure and injected a coagulant wrapping gauze around Kyle's torso, while radioing ahead to the emergency trauma team waiting back at base. The pilot pushed the throttle hard, flying low and fast through the rain, while the crew sat in silence, watching their teammate fight to stay conscious. Doctors later said that if the shark had bitten even an inch higher, the teeth would have severed arteries near the heart. Kyle had come within minutes of dying but survived thanks to fast care, his vest, and what they called unshakable resolve under extreme pressure. He spent weeks in recovery, undergoing surgery for the rib and muscle damage, then physical therapy to restore function to his side. He had permanent scarring and chronic pain, but he never once regretted the jump. The Coast Guard launched a full review of the operation. While they had dealt with alligator threats in flooded regions before, the idea of bull sharks moving that far inland during floods hadn't been considered in operational planning. New protocols were introduced within months, requiring sonar sweeps for submerged threats in brackish waters, and more protective gear for swimmers entering flood zones with known animal activity. Some missions were adjusted to rely more on hoist rescues from rooftops only, minimizing time in the water. Kyle Mason returned to active duty less than a year later, though he carried the memory of that bite every time he zipped up his vest. He knew how close it had been, how 1 second of surprise, one bad angle could have ended his life. But he also remembered the 4 people clinging to that rooftop, and the fact that they were alive because he didn't stop swimming. For him, that was worth every scar the water left behind. Mossel Bay, situated along South Africa's famed Garden Route, has earned its reputation as one of its premier coastal destinations. The horseshoe-shaped bay combined spectacular mountain scenery with warm waters that attracted tourists and marine life in equal measure. While the area was known for its great white shark population, attacks on humans remained exceedingly rare, a statistical anomaly that offered little comfort to Darren Thabo Nkosi and Malcolm Zane Vermeulen on the afternoon of February 17, 2023. The 2 childhood friends, both 28, had grown up in nearby George and considered themselves veterans of these waters. Darren, a mechanical engineer for a Cape Town technology firm, was visiting his hometown for the weekend. Malcolm, who operated a local adventure tourism company, had suggested an afternoon jet ski excursion to celebrate their 15-year friendship. Both were experienced watermen with profound respect for the ocean, but familiarity had bred a certain complacency about the dangers lurking beneath the surface. The day had been perfect for water sports: slight offshore winds, moderate swells, and clear visibility to the horizon. The friends had spent nearly 2 hours crisscrossing the bay, racing each other and jumping swells before exploring the bay's eastern edge, where rocky formations created fascinating kelp forests that swayed hypnotically beneath the surface. At approximately 4:45 p.m., they slowed their jet ski near a rocky outcrop known locally as Seal Corner, due to its popularity with Cape Fur seals. The location sat adjacent to Seal Island, a renowned hunting ground for great white sharks. Marine biologists had documented countless predation events in these waters, where sharks would strike from below with such force that both predator and prey would momentarily become airborne, a technique researchers called breaching. Malcolm, controlling the jet ski with Darren seated behind him, had cut the engine to idle, allowing them to drift peacefully beside the kelp beds. Neither man noticed the behavioral changes around them: the sudden disappearance of seals from the surface, the abrupt silencing of seabirds circling minutes earlier. These were subtle warning signs that experienced local fishermen might have recognized. The attack occurred with the explosive violence characteristic of great white hunting behavior. A 5-meter female shark, later identified by researchers from its distinctive dorsal fin markings, breached from below, striking the underside of the jet ski with such force that the 320-kilogram watercraft was lifted partially out of the water. The impact threw both men into the sea, separating them by several meters. Darren surfaced first, momentarily disoriented but unharmed. His initial confusion quickly turned to horror as he spotted the jet ski's hull, now sporting a massive bite mark approximately 70 centimeters across. His shout to Malcolm was cut short as he watched the water around his friend erupt in white foam. The shark had targeted Malcolm, perhaps mistaking his black wetsuit and erratic swimming movements for a wounded seal. With clinical precision, the predator clamped onto Malcolm's right leg from knee to ankle. Witnesses on a nearby tour boat described how the shark shook him violently before dragging him under for approximately 7 seconds, an eternity to Darren, who was already swimming desperately toward his friend. In what marine safety experts would later describe as an extraordinary act of courage, Darren reached Malcolm just as the shark released him. After its test bite, the predator likely determined that Malcolm was not its preferred prey. Shark researchers had documented this behavioral characteristic, where great whites release human victims after an initial bite rather than consuming them, but it provided little comfort to the bleeding victim. Malcolm's right leg had suffered catastrophic damage. The shark's serrated teeth had shredded through wetsuit, skin, muscle, and tendons, leaving his tibia exposed in several places. Remarkably, the major arteries had narrowly escaped severing, a factor that ultimately saved his life. Darren managed to heave his semi-conscious friend onto the damaged but still floating jet ski. The effort was complicated by Malcolm's injuries, the blood-slicked surfaces, and the knowledge that the shark remained in the vicinity, drawn by the expanding cloud of blood in the water. Tour boat captain Hendrik van der Merwe, having witnessed the attack through binoculars, was already speeding toward them, radioing for emergency medical services to meet them at the harbor. The following 20 minutes became a desperate race against blood loss and the possible return of the predator. Darren applied pressure to the wound using his rash guard shirt as van der Merwe's boat escorted them back to shore. Paramedics Zinlin Delovu and Thomas Backer were waiting at the marina and immediately began emergency treatment for hypovolemic shock as Malcolm slipped in and out of consciousness. The victim underwent 7 hours of microsurgery at a general hospital in Mossel Bay, where orthopedic surgeon Dr. Priya Niker led a team that reattached severed tendons and reconstructed damaged muscle tissue. While Malcolm would retain his leg, complete recovery would require 18 months of intensive physical therapy, leaving him with a permanent limp and approximately 60% functionality in his right ankle. Marine biologist Dr. Johan Wessels, who investigated the incident, confirmed through bite radius measurements and tooth patterns that the attacker had been a mature female great white, likely hunting in the area due to the seasonal movement of seal populations. Analysis of the jet ski revealed tooth fragments embedded in the fiberglass hull, providing valuable genetic material for ongoing white shark population studies. The psychological impact on both men proved nearly as profound as the physical trauma. Darren, though physically unscathed, developed severe post-traumatic stress disorder, characterized by recurring nightmares and panic attacks at the sight or sound of ocean waves. Malcolm's operation of his adventure tourism business was permanently altered. He never offered jet ski tours again. He advocated for shark conservation and education, frequently reminding listeners that he had entered the shark's domain, not the reverse. Perhaps most remarkably, both men returned to the attack site exactly 1 year later, Malcolm on the tour boat rather than in the water, to participate in a research tagging operation with Dr. Wessels. Their experience contributed valuable data to shark behavior studies and helped develop safety protocols for recreational watercraft in known shark territories. The incident remains one of the few documented cases where both victims of a great white attack survived to provide detailed accounts of their experience. Their story has since been incorporated into marine safety briefings along South Africa's coast, a sobering reminder that even in familiar waters, humans remain visitors in an ecosystem that is neither apex nor well adapted. The sun was just beginning to warm the waters of False Bay on a clear June morning, as Peter Van Rooyen prepared for what was meant to be one last long training swim before the charity crossing scheduled for later that month. At 46 years old, Peter was a seasoned open-water swimmer who had spent countless hours in South Africa's oceans, braving cold currents, jellyfish, and rough waves to prepare for races and fundraisers that raised money for local causes. It was his favorite spot to train alone, a place where the bay's calm waters and mild visibility made for ideal conditions to work on endurance and technique. On this particular morning, the sea was almost glassy, with only a slight ripple from the gentle breeze and faint underwater currents flowing toward the shore. Peter entered the water at first light, stretching his arms and legs and then pushing off from the sandy beach with a smooth, practiced stroke. His goal was a 3.5-kilometer swim around the point and back, a route that had become routine but still challenging enough to keep his focus sharp. With his wetsuit hugging his frame and a bright orange swim cap marking his position, Peter set a steady pace, his breath slow and rhythmic as his body sliced through the cool water. Nearby, a friend and kayak escort named Johan followed at a cautious distance, keeping an eye on the swimmer and the horizon for any signs of trouble. The waters were known for seals, occasional dolphins, and of course, the great white sharks that inhabited the bay. Local authorities had recently increased patrols and installed shark spotters along the coastline to warn swimmers and surfers, but Peter trusted his own experience and the kayak escort to keep him safe. About 40 minutes into his swim, Peter was roughly 250 meters from shore, midway through his last lap. The morning light glinted off the surface as he turned his head to breathe, eyes scanning the horizon out of habit. Suddenly, without warning, a massive shadow moved swiftly from behind, cutting through the water like a torpedo. Peter felt a violent, searing pain as something slammed into his left shoulder and upper back with overwhelming force. The great white shark had struck, its powerful jaws clamping down on muscle and wetsuit, tearing through fabric and flesh in a snap that echoed beneath the surface. Peter's body instinctively jerked forward as the shark released, retreating into the depths as quickly as it had appeared. The sharp, crushing bite had missed major arteries, but left deep lacerations and torn muscle that sent waves of burning pain radiating through his left side. Blood began to seep into the water, mixing with the sea's cold current and drawing Johan's immediate attention. From his kayak, Johan saw the sudden splash and turbulent swirl, then heard Peter's sharp cries. Without hesitation, he paddled hard toward the swimmer, calling out over the water and pulling him onto the kayak as Peter's strength faltered. Despite the heavy bleeding from the bite wounds, Peter remained conscious, his breathing rapid but controlled as Johan applied pressure to slow the blood flow. The kayak bobbed gently in the bay's mild swell, carrying them quickly back toward the shore where emergency crews had been alerted by the escort's radio call. Paramedics arrived within 15 minutes, carefully transferring Peter onto a stretcher and rushing him to a trauma center, a short drive away. In the emergency room, surgeons worked rapidly to assess and repair the damage. The bite had ripped a jagged gash across Peter's shoulder blade and upper back, muscles shredded and skin hanging loose. Over 60 stitches were required to close the wounds, and a skin graft was performed to replace tissue that was too badly damaged to heal naturally. The doctors confirmed that, although the injuries were severe, Peter was incredibly fortunate that no major arteries or nerves had been severed, a difference between life and death measured in millimeters. News of the attack spread quickly through the local swimming and surfing communities, sending shockwaves of concern and sympathy. The area was famous for its marine life, including a robust population of seals that attracted great white sharks, but attacks on swimmers were rare. Authorities reiterated the importance of shark spotters, early warning systems, and safe swimming protocols to minimize risk, while local groups called for increased monitoring of seal colonies and public education on how to behave in shark country. Peter, once stabilized and recovered, spoke publicly about the incident. He expressed gratitude for the quick response of his kayak escort and emergency crews, crediting their skill and calm for saving his life. Despite the trauma, he stated clearly that he would not return to open water training, having made the difficult decision to prioritize his family and health over the sport he loved. However, he remained a vocal supporter of ongoing shark awareness programs and encouraged swimmers and athletes to respect the ocean's power, while taking all possible precautions. The incident left a permanent mark on Peter's life, physically through the scars that traced his back and shoulder, and emotionally in the cautious way he now approached the sea. Friends and fellow swimmers visited regularly, helping him adapt to limitations during his recovery and reminding him of his strength and resilience. though he would never again race through the cold, blue waters of False Bay. Peter's story became a reminder to the community that even the calmest morning could turn dangerous in an instant, that the ocean held both beauty and risk, and that respect for nature's predators was not optional but essential. Months later, when the charity swim went ahead with safety protocols heightened and additional escorts in place, Peter watched from the shore, proud of the community's resolve but certain his last lap had been final. The shark that had struck him remained a silent presence beneath the waves, an ancient predator whose role in the bay's ecosystem was undeniable, even if it came at a human cost. Gansbai, South Africa, positioned along the country's southern coast, had established itself as the global epicenter for great white shark research by 2017. Leila Dubois arrived in Gansbai during the austral summer of January 2017. Her acceptance into the Institute's competitive internship program, representing the culmination of years of academic dedication at a university in Paris. At 22 years old, she possessed the idealistic fervor common among her generation of marine biologists, convinced that proper research and conservation efforts could resolve the growing tensions between human development and marine ecosystem preservation. The Institute's research station occupied a converted warehouse overlooking the harbor, its walls lined with tracking equipment, specimen storage facilities, and the massive steel cages used for underwater observation missions. Dr. James Whitmore, the program's British director, had built the facility's reputation through 2 decades of groundbreaking research, though recent budget constraints had forced compromises that would prove catastrophic. Leila's initial weeks involved standard research assistant duties, data entry, equipment maintenance, and classroom instruction on great white behavior patterns. Her enthusiasm impressed the senior staff, particularly her willingness to volunteer for additional responsibilities that other interns avoided. She demonstrated particular interest in the cage diving operations that formed the backbone of the Institute's tagging research. The observation cages, constructed from reinforced steel bars and designed to protect researchers during close-range shark encounters, required constant maintenance due to saltwater corrosion and the tremendous forces exerted by investigating sharks. However, budget cuts had delayed scheduled maintenance on several units, with repairs being postponed until the end of the research season to minimize operational disruptions. On February 18, 2017, the Institute prepared for its most high-profile research mission of the season. A documentary crew had arrived to film great white tagging operations for an upcoming conservation special, bringing international attention to the program's work. The presence of media cameras created additional pressure to demonstrate successful shark encounters, leading to decisions that prioritized spectacle over safety protocols. Dr. Whitmore assigned Leila to the observation cage for the filming, recognizing that her photogenic appearance and articulate explanations would enhance the documentary's appeal to younger audiences. The decision represented a significant honor for an intern with only 3 weeks of experience, though several senior researchers privately questioned the wisdom of placing an inexperienced volunteer in such a prominent role. The research vessel Southern Cross departed Gansbai Harbor at dawn, carrying the crew, institute staff, and 3 observation cages toward the prime research area near Dyer Island. Water conditions appeared ideal, with moderate swells and visibility extending beyond 30 feet underwater. Early hydrophone readings indicated multiple large shark signatures in the target area, promising excellent footage opportunities. Cage preparation began immediately upon reaching the research site, with each unit being lowered into position and secured with multiple safety lines. The cage assigned to Leila showed visible signs of wear, including corroded welds along the door frame and several bent bars from previous shark encounters. However, time constraints and the presence of filming crews prevented thorough safety inspections that might have revealed critical structural weaknesses. At 10:30 a.m., chumming operations commenced to attract sharks to the filming area. The mixture of fish blood, oil, and chopped bait created an expanding slick that would draw great whites from considerable distances. Within 45 minutes, the first predators appeared, 2 adult great whites measuring over 4 meters in length, their powerful forms cutting through the water with predatory grace. Leila entered her assigned cage at 11:15 a.m., her excitement evident despite the professional demeanor she maintained for the cameras. Her underwater communications equipment functioned properly, allowing surface observers to monitor her observations as the great whites began investigating the cage structures with increasing boldness. The attack occurred at 11:32 a.m. with shocking suddenness. The largest great white, estimated at nearly 5 meters in length, launched itself at Layla's cage with tremendous force, its massive body slamming into the structure with enough impact to buckle the corroded doorframe. The faulty latch, weakened by months of deferred maintenance, gave way completely under the assault. The cage door swung open, leaving Layla exposed to the massive predator now thrashing within the confined space. Her screams, transmitted clearly through the communication system, alerted surface observers to the catastrophic equipment failure. The great white's powerful jaws closed around her torso, its serrated teeth inflicting fatal injuries within seconds of the initial contact. Dr. Whitmore and the dive safety team attempted immediate rescue operations, but the shark's aggressive behavior and the compromised cage structure prevented effective intervention. Emergency ascent procedures brought Layla to the surface within 3 minutes of the attack, but her injuries proved beyond the capabilities of onboard medical equipment. The footage, showing the moments leading up to and including the fatal attack, became crucial evidence in subsequent investigations. The recordings revealed multiple safety violations and equipment deficiencies that the Institute had been aware of but had chosen to ignore, due to budget constraints and operational pressures. Layla's personal journal, discovered during the investigation, contained detailed entries expressing growing concerns about safety standards and ethical compromises within the Institute's operations. Her final entry, written the evening before the fatal dive, questioned whether the program's pursuit of dramatic footage had begun to overshadow its scientific mission. The tragedy resulted in comprehensive reviews of cage diving safety protocols throughout South Africa's marine research community. Dr. Whitmore resigned his position amid revelations about deferred maintenance and cost-cutting measures that had compromised participant safety. The Marine Conservation Organization faced criminal negligence charges and ultimately ceased operations in 2018. Layla's death served as a sobering reminder that youthful idealism and institutional prestige could not substitute for rigorous safety standards when confronting nature's most formidable predators. Her sacrifice led to enhanced regulations governing marine research internships and mandatory equipment inspection protocols that continue protecting young researchers pursuing careers in marine conservation. Seychelles archipelago was long considered nature's masterpiece in the Indian Ocean. Mahé, the largest island, was renowned for its breathtaking beaches and crystalline waters. La Digue Bay on the eastern coast of Mahé had gained popularity among photographers for its unique combination of granite boulders, turquoise shallows, and dramatic mountain backdrops. Most visitors didn't realize that the picturesque bay was also situated near a river mouth that, during heavy rainfall, created the perfect conditions for one of the ocean's most feared predators. On September 18, 2018, the islands were experiencing the tail end of an unseasonal tropical depression. The intermittent showers were an inconvenience for most tourists, but for acclaimed fashion photographer Xavier Beaumont, they represented a rare creative opportunity. Beaumont, a 42-year-old French national who had made his name shooting for elite fashion magazines, had arrived in the Seychelles 3 days earlier for a sustainable swimwear campaign. His reputation had been built on capturing models in dramatic natural settings, desert sandstorms, Arctic snowscapes, and now, he hoped, the ethereal beauty of models posed in a tropical rainstorm with lightning-illuminated waters. The shoot that morning consisted of Beaumont, his assistant Lucien Moreau, 3 models, Amara Okafor from Nigeria, Elise Chen from Taiwan, and Sofia Petrov from Russia, along with makeup artist Danielle Rousseau and local fixer Olivier Laporte. The latter had expressed reservations about the shooting location that morning, noting that recent rains had caused significant runoff from the nearby Rivière Anglaise, turning sections of the normally clear bay into a murky turquoise. Laporte had mentioned to Beaumont that local fishermen avoided such conditions, as the freshwater runoff attracted baitfish and created poor visibility, a dangerous combination. However, the dramatic skies enchanted the photographer, and the approaching storm clouds created a moody backdrop against the tropical paradise. He insisted the shoot proceed as planned. By 11:30 a.m., the team had set up along the shoreline. Beaumont waded into the waist-deep water approximately 20 meters from shore, positioning himself to capture the models against the dramatic skyline. The water where he stood had a distinct brownish tinge from the river outflow, but the photographer declared it created a sublime contrast with the models' colorful swimwear. The rain began falling in earnest as the models entered the water, making the dreamlike scene Beaumont had envisioned. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the photographer called for the models to spread out for a wide-angle shot. Assistant Lucien Moreau noticed something concerning, splashing about 50 meters beyond their position that didn't match the rainfall pattern. He called out to Beaumont, but his voice was lost in a crack of thunder. What happened next occurred with horrifying speed. Witnesses later described seeing a massive dark shape surge through the water toward Beaumont. The tiger shark, later estimated by marine biologists to be nearly 4 meters long, struck the photographer from below and behind. The initial impact knocked Beaumont forward, his camera flying from his hands. Before he could regain his footing, the shark bit into his thigh and abdomen in a single devastating motion. The water around him instantly turned crimson. Standing closest to Beaumont, model Amara Okafor later reported that he had been pulled under for several seconds before the shark released him. The photographer surfaced once, gasping, before disappearing again beneath the bloodied water. Fixer Olivier Laporte and assistant Lucien Moreau rushed into the shallows, dragging Beaumont's limp form toward shore while shouting for the models to get out of the water immediately. By the time they reached the beach, Beaumont had lost consciousness. Despite Rousseau's frantic attempts at first aid and Laporte's immediate call for emergency services, the photographer had lost too much blood. He was pronounced dead before the medical helicopter arrived 27 minutes later. Marine biologist Dr. Elena Sokolov, who investigated the incident, determined that the tiger shark had likely been drawn to the bay by the unusual conditions. The rainwater runoff had created a murky, nutrient-rich environment that attracted smaller fish, which drew the predator closer to shore than usual. The splashing of the photo shoot participants, combined with the low visibility and the shark's opportunistic feeding nature, had created what she termed a perfect storm scenario. Beaumont's waterproof camera was recovered the following day by Coast Guard divers searching for evidence. Remarkably, it had continued recording for nearly 7 minutes after being dropped, capturing blurry footage of the attack's aftermath as it lay on the sandy bottom. This footage would later prove valuable to shark researchers studying predator behavior, though it was sealed from public release out of respect for Beaumont's family. Models Okafor, Chen, and Petrov all received trauma counseling following the incident. Okafor later advocated for ocean safety awareness, partnering with marine conservation groups to educate the public about shark behavior and risk factors. Lucien Moreau, devastated by his inability to save his mentor and friend, established the Beaumont Foundation, which funded research into shark detection technologies for popular swimming areas worldwide. The foundation's work led to the developing of an AI-driven monitoring system first deployed in the Seychelles in 2020, which has since prevented several potential encounters. For the local community of Mahé, the tragedy served as a sobering reminder that beneath the postcard-perfect surface of their island paradise lurked ancient predators whose behavior could be influenced by seemingly minor environmental changes. Though tourist numbers recovered within a year, the beaches near river mouths would never again be viewed with the same carefree innocence, particularly when rain clouds gathered on the horizon and the turquoise waters began to darken with the Earth's runoff. The waters off Baja California were deceptively calm that morning, the sea painted glassy blue under a rising sun. Lucia had always loved these quiet hours, when the ocean was still, and the only sounds were soft waves lapping against the hull and distant seabirds crying over the horizon. At 31, she was already a respected marine ecologist from Spain, with nearly a decade of fieldwork behind her. She had dived with orcas, tagged manta rays, and swum among whales. But this was different. This was solitude. The research team had anchored near a deep-water buoy, one of several scattered along the migratory corridor used by humpbacks. Their modest but well-equipped vessel was home base for a 2-week expedition that recorded whale song, tracked surface movement, and monitored plankton blooms in the channel's upwellings. Lucia, ever dedicated, rose early that day. She wanted to recalibrate an acoustic sensor tethered to the buoy before the winds picked up. No one else was awake when she lowered herself quietly into the water with mask and fins, towing a waterproof notepad and small toolkit. Her movements were careful, practiced, and confident. The buoy was positioned just above the edge of a submarine canyon that dropped steeply into colder, deeper water, a place rich with prey and known, though rarely spoken of directly, as an occasional hunting ground for large predators. Lucia was aware of the risks. She had read the local briefings, reviewed migration data, and listened to accounts of divers who had seen shadows slipping below them just out of view. Still, the water felt safe in the quiet of early morning. With visibility stretching dozens of meters, she worked beneath the buoy, tightening a loose sensor bracket, noting small corrosion patches, and marking calibration values. It was simple and routine, and she moved slowly as she adjusted her orientation. She floated just under the surface, the lines from the buoy occasionally brushing against her arm. What she didn't notice was how far she had drifted. The current had gently pulled her away from the shallow shelf and over the canyon lip. The water darkened below her, turning from turquoise to an inkier shade of blue. Somewhere deep in that darkness, a shadow rose. It was a great white female, nearly 4 meters long. It had likely been patrolling the edge of the drop-off, drawn closer by the rhythmic splashing near the buoy. The silhouette of Lucia's body above, combined with the shadow of the floating structure, resembled a distressed animal, perhaps a seal or injured fish. She didn't hear it approach. Only a sudden and sharp scream echoed across the water just once. Her colleagues, still half asleep aboard the nearby vessel, jolted upright. 2 rushed onto the deck and scanned the surface. For a few seconds there was nothing, just empty water and the quiet bobbing of the buoy. Then something red. Lucia's body surfaced near the buoy, floating awkwardly. One fin still on her right foot, arms drifting loosely beside her. Her left leg was gone above the knee, torn away entirely. The left side of her back bore deep, ragged gashes, flesh stripped down to exposed ribs. The team launched the skiff and retrieved her within minutes, but she was already dead. The blood loss had been massive. One of the researchers, shaking, flew a drone to scan the surrounding area. Within seconds, it captured footage of a large shark circling lazily beneath the buoy, its body smooth and pale beneath the surface sheen. The animal was slow now, having already delivered its strike and withdrawn. It showed no fear, no urgency, just silent dominance in its domain. The team reported the incident immediately. Authorities, journalists, and marine biologists from the mainland arrived by helicopter within hours. The footage was reviewed. Based on the bite pattern, footage, and local movement data, the shark was identified as a mature female great white, known to patrol the deeper sections of the trench during peak feeding times. Lucia had not been wearing a shark deterrent, though several were available on board. The device, a simple magnetic field emitter, was standard protocol for deeper excursions, but she had considered her snorkel near the buoy low risk. She had also gone alone, something typically discouraged during offshore work even in familiar waters. The Mexican scientific community was shaken. Lucia was not just another name on a list. She had been a rising figure in marine biology, respected for her field discipline and known for her cautious approach. But even caution had limits. The fact that the attack happened near a monitored buoy raised troubling questions. Did the buoy attract prey that lured the shark closer? Did its shadow confuse the predator into thinking it was an injured animal hiding beneath? Was the water simply too deep for comfort, too close to the hunting ground, too far from the protective rhythms of the surface pods? A week later, her body was flown back to Spain, escorted by 2 colleagues who had worked closely with her on whale tagging projects. A memorial was held at her home institute, where students and mentors spoke about her passion for the sea, her calm under pressure, and her relentless drive to understand the creatures she loved. Back in Baja, the team removed the buoy. Further dives in the canyon zone were indefinitely suspended, and new regulations were drafted mandating paired excursions and mandatory deterrent use during solo tasks, no matter how shallow. The attack did not diminish Lucia's legacy, but altered how others approached the sea. For all her knowledge, she had become part of the very food chain she studied, and that cold truth hung over every diver who later entered those same waters, reminding them that even the most experienced could be mistaken for prey. In time, the ocean grew quiet again. The winds returned, the whales resumed their migrations, and the sharks kept to their patterns. But under the surface, where shadows move without sound, Lucia's story remained, a solemn echo of risk, reverence, and the ever-thin line between study and survival. Ponta do Ouro, a small coastal town in southern Mozambique, had long been revered for its pristine beaches and vibrant marine life. The region straddled the border with South Africa, attracting adventure seekers worldwide with its renowned diving spots and untamed coastal beauty. In 2019, the area was designated as part of the Ponta do Ouro Partial Marine Reserve, a testament to its ecological significance, where freshwater systems dramatically merged with the Indian Ocean. In July 2022, what should have been an exhilarating adventure for a group of international travelers transformed into a horrific nightmare that would forever change how locals and visitors viewed these seemingly idyllic waters. 23-year-old Nikolai Petrov, a Russian backpacker with an Instagram following dedicated to his extreme adventures, had learned of a secret spot from locals. It was a remote inlet approximately 12 kilometers north of the main tourist area, where a freshwater stream cascaded into the ocean, creating a stunning natural phenomenon. What made this location particularly appealing to thrill seekers was a 15-meter cliff overlooking a deep pool where the fresh and salt waters mixed. Nikolai arrived with 4 companions: Astrid Johansson, a Swedish marine biology student; Mateo Rodriguez, a Chilean photographer documenting their journey; Leila Mbeki, a South African tour guide who had reluctantly agreed to show them the spot; and Takeshi Yamamoto, a Japanese freediving enthusiast who had met the group just days earlier at a beachside hostel. The day had started with unusual weather. Heavy rainfall inland had caused the freshwater stream to swell, pushing a torrent of murky water into the ocean. The typically clear blue waters had transformed into a brownish swirl. Leila had expressed concerns about the conditions, noting that local fishermen avoided such areas after heavy rains. The freshwater runoff attracted baitfish, which in turn drew predators. However, her warnings were dismissed by the excited group, particularly Nikolai, who was eager to capture footage for his social media channels. At approximately 2:47 p.m., after hiking 40 minutes through dense coastal vegetation, the group reached the cliff. Below them, the water churned with sediment and organic matter from the inland floods. The group spent nearly an hour on the cliff's edge, photographing and preparing for the jump. Leila maintained that conditions were unsafe, but Nikolai insisted the murky water only added to the adventure's mystique. Nikolai was the first to leap. He executed a perfect dive, disappearing into the brown waters below. When he surfaced seconds later, his triumphant expression quickly transformed into agony. The water around him began to churn as he thrashed, screaming that something had bitten him. Blood rapidly spread across the surface. The others, initially frozen in shock, reacted with varying levels of comprehension. Takeshi was the first to understand what was happening. Shouting that it was a shark attack, he scrambled down a narrow path toward the water's edge rather than jumping in. Not immediately processing the danger, Mateo had already leapt in to help his friend. Astrid screamed from above as he swam toward Nikolai, having spotted a large shadow circling back toward the 2 men. None of them realized that they had entered the hunting ground of a 3-meter bull shark, a species notorious for its aggressive behavior and unique ability to tolerate fresh water. Marine biologists later explained that the flooding had created perfect conditions for the predator. Reduced visibility, increased prey fish, and the disorientation of salt freshwater boundaries that bull sharks were evolutionarily adapted to exploit. The shark struck Nikolai a second time, its powerful jaws clamping onto his thigh and groin. The force of the bite nearly pulled him underwater permanently. Now just meters away, Mateo froze in horror as the water around his friend turned crimson. Leila had already sprinted back toward a cluster of fishing huts they had passed earlier, screaming for help in Portuguese. Within minutes, local fisherman Emmanuel dos Santos and his son Tiago launched their small boat, grabbing gaffs and a makeshift first aid kit. By the time they reached the inlet, Mateo had somehow managed to drag Nikolai to a rocky outcropping at the water's edge. The shark had circled back repeatedly but hadn't attacked again. Takeshi had tied his shirt around Nikolai's upper thigh, creating an improvised tourniquet that likely saved his life. The fishermen pulled both men into their boat, just as the bull shark made another pass, its dorsal fin cutting through the bloodied water mere meters away. Tiago later reported that the shark was one of the largest bull sharks he had seen in the region, estimating it at close to 300 kilograms. The journey to medical help was excruciating. The nearest hospital was 90 minutes away in Maputo, but the local clinic in Ponta de Oro had a trauma-trained nurse who stabilized Nikolai before the ambulance arrived. The Russian had lost nearly 40% of his blood volume. The shark's teeth had severed his femoral artery and torn through muscle and connective tissue in his groin and lower abdomen. Emergency surgery in Maputo repaired the arterial damage, but Nikolai would require 6 subsequent operations and extensive physical therapy to regain partial mobility. Leila Mbeki became an advocate for shark safety awareness, conducting educational programs for tourists throughout Mozambique's coastal regions. The group's footage of the incident, captured on Mateo's waterproof camera, was later used in marine conservation educational materials, showing how human recreation and predator behavior can intersect with devastating consequences. As for the rock where Nikolai had been dragged ashore, locals began calling it Pedra de Sangue, Blood Rock. Despite official attempts to discourage cliff jumping at the site, adventure tourism slowly resumed months later. Yet every visitor on that cliff now pauses to read the weathered warning sign that bears Nikolai Petrov's name and the date of his encounter with one of nature's most perfectly evolved predators. Recife, the vibrant capital of Pernambuco state in northeastern Brazil, had earned the unfortunate distinction of recording one of the world's highest shark attack rates by 2014. It was against this backdrop that 15-year-old Rafael Monteiro pursued his passion for kite flying, unaware that his innocent hobby would nearly cost him his life. Rafael lived in the sprawling favela of Brasilia Teimosa, a densely packed community that had grown organically along Recife's southern shoreline. His family's modest concrete block house sat 3 streets back from the beach, close enough that he could hear the constant crash of Atlantic waves against the reef formations that gave the city its name. Despite the neighborhood's poverty and reputation for violence, Rafael found solace in the simple joy of flying elaborate kites along the water's edge. The art of kite making had been passed down through generations in Rafael's family, with his grandfather teaching him to construct complex designs using bamboo frames, tissue paper, and carefully balanced tail configurations. Rafael's kites were renowned throughout the favela for their size and stability, some measuring over 2 meters in wingspan and capable of reaching heights that made them visible from several kilometers away. A festival held in June 2014 provided the perfect opportunity for Rafael to debut his latest creation, a massive diamond-shaped kite decorated with traditional Brazilian patterns and equipped with LED lights for evening flights. The festival atmosphere drew thousands of residents to the beaches, creating a carnival-like environment that temporarily masked the underlying dangers of Recife's waters. Boa Viagem Beach, where Rafael chose to launch his festival kite, stretched for several kilometers along the city's modern district. The wide sandy expanse and consistent trade winds made it ideal for kite flying, though warning signs posted every few hundred meters advised against swimming due to elevated shark activity. The beach's popularity during festival season meant that hundreds of people would be in and around the water, increasing the likelihood of negative encounters with marine predators. On the afternoon of June 24th, Rafael arrived at his usual kite-flying spot near the Boa Viagem Pier, carrying his festival masterpiece and a small toolkit for field adjustments. The wind conditions appeared perfect, with steady 15-knot breezes coming directly off the ocean. Festival crowds had already begun gathering, with families setting up beach umbrellas and vendors preparing for the evening celebrations. The first launch attempt from the dry sand failed, when the kite's oversized frame caught in a crosswind and crashed into nearby palm trees. Frustrated but determined, Rafael decided to wade into the shallow water where he could achieve better wind alignment and avoid terrestrial obstacles. This decision would prove nearly fatal, as recent illegal fishing activities in the area had attracted bull sharks closer to shore than usual. Unknown to Rafael and other beachgoers, local fishermen had been illegally dumping fish waste and using prohibited nets in the shallow waters off Boa Viagem Beach. These practices created artificial feeding opportunities that drew bull sharks, known for their aggressive nature and tolerance for shallow water, into areas normally considered safe for human activity. At approximately 4:30 p.m., Rafael waded knee-deep into the surf, his attention focused entirely on positioning his large kite for optimal wind capture. The festival atmosphere around him included music, laughter, and the general chaos of celebration, masking any warning signs that might have indicated danger in the water around him. As Raphael maneuvered deeper into the water to avoid submerged debris, his feet became tangled in discarded fishing line and plastic waste that had accumulated along the bottom. His attempts to free himself involved considerable splashing and erratic movement, creating the surface disturbance patterns that bull sharks associate with wounded prey animals. The attack began at 4:34 p.m. when a bull shark, estimated at approximately 2.5 meters in length, struck Raphael's left thigh with devastating force. The predator's powerful jaws clamped down through his shorts and deep into muscle tissue, the impact knocking him completely off balance and sending him crashing face first into the water. Raphael's screams pierced the festival atmosphere as the shark's serrated teeth ground against his femur bone, the predator's characteristic head-shaking behavior threatening to sever his leg completely. Blood immediately began clouding the water around the attack site, while panicked beachgoers scrambled to exit the surf and alert emergency services. Lifeguard Marcos Silva, stationed at Tower Number 12, approximately 200 meters from the attack site, heard Raphael's screams and immediately began running toward the emergency. His training and shark attack response proved crucial, as he arrived at the scene within 90 seconds, carrying a rescue board and emergency medical supplies. Silva's rescue attempt involved repeatedly striking the bull shark's snout and gill slits with the fiberglass rescue board, a technique specifically designed to discourage shark attacks without causing permanent harm to the animal. The impacts, combined with Raphael's continued struggles, eventually caused the predator to release its grip and disappear back into deeper water. The rescue operation that followed demonstrated the efficiency of Recife's emergency response system, developed specifically to handle the city's frequent shark encounters. Raphael was dragged from the water within minutes of the attack, with Silva applying direct pressure to the wound while calling for immediate medical evacuation. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes, finding Raphael conscious but in severe shock from blood loss and trauma. The shark's bite had caused extensive damage to his quadriceps muscle and had narrowly missed the femoral artery, an injury that would have proven fatal within minutes. Emergency tourniquets and fluids stabilized his condition during the 15-minute ambulance ride to a trauma center. Surgical intervention required 6 hours to repair the extensive muscle damage and remove embedded tooth fragments from Raphael's thigh. Orthopedic surgeons successfully reattached severed tendons, though permanent nerve damage left him with limited mobility in his left leg and chronic pain that would affect him for years. The attack investigation revealed the extent of illegal fishing activities that had contributed to increased shark presence in the area. Environmental authorities launched a crackdown on unauthorized fishing practices, while beach safety officials implemented additional warning systems and increased lifeguard coverage during festival periods. Raphael's recovery proved lengthy and challenging, requiring months of physical therapy and psychological counseling to address trauma-related anxiety. Despite the physical and emotional toll, Raphael eventually returned to kite flying, though he never again ventured into the water during his flights. His experience became part of local folklore, serving as a cautionary tale about the hidden dangers that lurked beneath Recife's deceptively beautiful waters, and the importance of respecting the ocean's most formidable predators. Off Gansby, South Africa, was restless that morning, swells rolling in harder than expected, the gray sky pressing low over the turquoise water as a Russian news crew prepared to film a special segment on the rising great white population near Shark Alley. The broadcast was supposed to be routine, with pre-planned commentary from the deck of a mid-sized boat anchored near a known shark hotspot. But the ocean had other plans. The team had been on site since dawn, setting up equipment on the deck and along the boat's edge, with 3 of the 6 crew members wearing wetsuits in case they needed underwater footage or had to assist divers. The live segment began smoothly, with the anchor standing near the railing, describing the ecological importance of great whites in the region. Just a few meters away, the ocean churned softly, dark and seemingly calm beneath the surface. Camera 2 was positioned just above the waterline to get a dramatic angle of the anchor with the sea behind it, while another camera operator moved along the side, tightening a lens and adjusting focus. Without warning, a rogue swell struck the side of the vessel. It wasn't massive, but it was strong enough to cause the boat to shift with a violent jolt, tilting suddenly to port and throwing several people off balance. The camera operator closest to the edge slipped first, landing hard on his side and skidding toward the railing. A production assistant grabbed at him, but the sudden shift caused both to lose footing. At nearly the same moment, one of the divers who had been kneeling near the rear tumbled backward, hitting the deck before rolling clean off the boat. Within seconds, 3 crew members were in the water, all yelling at once, their limbs flailing in panic. The live camera, still rolling, captured the screams and splashes before the control room abruptly cut the feed. Beneath them, movement stirred. The crew hadn't realized how close they were to a cruising great white until it surfaced in response to the commotion, its huge, pale body rising from the deep like a ghost through glass. Nearly 5 meters long and weighing well over a ton, the shark closed the distance in seconds. Its torpedo-shaped form moved with chilling precision, drawn by the vibrations of struggling prey above. Blood hadn't yet entered the water, but the chaotic motion had been enough to trigger an instinct it couldn't ignore. The first to see it was the production assistant, who caught a glimpse of its dorsal fin slicing through the waves as it veered toward the diver. The others tried to swim toward the boat, but the sudden coldness of fear, mixed with the drag of their soaked clothing, slowed their frantic strokes. The diver turned too late. The great white lunged upward with terrifying force, its jaws open wide, rows of serrated teeth flashing as it surged through the surface and bit down on the diver's right leg. The impact sent a spray of water and blood into the air. The bite wasn't a full amputation, but it ripped through the wetsuit and flesh with horrifying ease, leaving exposed muscle and gaping wounds. The diver's scream was muffled by the crashing waves, but the agony in his voice still pierced the morning air. He flailed instinctively, which only caused more blood to pump from the shredded limb, clouding the water in a widening red spiral. The shark circled again, not in a frenzied attack, but with measured curiosity, as if deciding whether to strike again. The 2 other crew members made it to the boat's stern, where 2 others leaned over with life rings and poles. One crewman managed to hook the production assistant and haul him up quickly, but the injured diver struggled to stay afloat. By now, the shark had passed beneath the injured man again, its massive shadow brushing just beneath the surface like a submarine. For a moment, it seemed like the attack would continue. The dorsal fin broke the water again as the shark turned, angling for another approach. But something changed. Perhaps the people shouting from above or the boat's motor starting up as the captain tried to shift position. The shark slowed, circling once more before diving down and vanishing into the murky green below. The remaining man in the water, covered in blood and barely conscious, was finally pulled aboard by 2 crew members using a rope tied around his chest. His leg was mangled, the wetsuit torn to ribbons, and flesh hanging in strips. The crew moved fast. Towels were pressed against the wounds, belts and cords were used as makeshift tourniquets, and the anchor, still pale and stunned, helped hold the diver steady as the team radioed for medical evacuation. The boat sped back toward the harbor at full throttle, bouncing over the waves while blood stained the deck and soaked into the towels clutched against the diver's thigh. None of the crew died that day, but the impact went far beyond physical wounds. The diver survived emergency surgery and would eventually walk again, though with permanent nerve damage and deep psychological scars. The others returned to work weeks later, but none could forget the raw violence they had witnessed, the size of the predator, the suddenness of the attack, and the helplessness of floating in water that could turn deadly in seconds. In the aftermath, producers faced heavy criticism for putting crew members at risk without sufficient safety protocols in place. Investigations focused on why the team had been so close to known shark waters without full cages or protective measures. Experts emphasized that great whites are not mindless killers, but are still large, instinct-driven predators, especially dangerous when startled or triggered by erratic movement. What made the incident so haunting wasn't just the bite or the blood. It was how fast everything happened, how quickly a moment meant for storytelling turned into a brush with death. For the crew, it was a reminder that nature doesn't care about cameras or broadcasts or schedules. The sea, the sharks, and the instincts beneath the surface follow their own rules. And sometimes they break through with terrifying force. The coastal town of Gansbaai, South Africa, had long been known as the Great White Shark Capital of the world. On May 13, 2025, what began as a routine criminal investigation would become a harrowing testament to nature's unpredictable ferocity. Detective Sergeant Thulani Nkosi had been tracking a double homicide case for weeks. The breakthrough came when an anonymous tip revealed that crucial evidence had been disposed of in a vehicle deliberately sunk in an inlet known locally as Shark Alley. a channel between Dyer Island and Geyser Rock infamous for its dense great white shark population. The decision to send divers was not made lightly, but the evidence was critical to prosecuting the prime suspect, local businessman Peter Vorster. The specialized maritime crime unit assembled at dawn. The team consisted of 6 experienced police divers, Detective Sergeant Lungiel Mbatha, who led the underwater operations, Constable Zanele Kumalo, the unit's most experienced diver, Officer Saifo Radebe, a former Navy specialist, Senior Detective Willem Pretorius, a veteran of over 300 forensic dives, Constable Taryn Govinder, the unit's newest but most technically proficient member, and Sergeant Jabu Dlamini, who specialized in underwater evidence collection. The morning was overcast, with a light mist hovering over choppy waters. Marine biologist Dr. Astrid Janssen, who consulted for the police department, noted that conditions were less than ideal. Recent storm activity had stirred the waters, reducing visibility to less than 3 meters. More concerning, local fishermen had reported increased great white activity following a seal pupping season that had drawn numerous sharks to the area. At around 8:43 a.m., the team deployed from their vessel, descending methodically toward the submerged vehicle that sat 30 meters below on a sandy shelf. They carried specialized equipment for underwater forensics and maintained constant communication with the surface team. The operation was expected to take no more than 40 minutes. 22 minutes into the dive, Officer Radebe spotted the sunken vehicle, a black sedan partially buried in silt. As the team approached, Constable Govinder noticed something disturbing. Traces of what appeared to be dried blood had seeped from the trunk, creating a faint but detectable scent trail in the water. At around 9:08 a.m., the surface team heard a burst of garbled communication. What followed were chaotic transmissions and emergency signals. A massive female great white shark, later estimated to be nearly 6 meters long, had emerged suddenly from the deeper waters beyond the shelf. Marine biologists would later speculate that the shark had been drawn by the combination of the divers' movements, the metallic sounds of their equipment, and the lingering blood traces from the vehicle's grim contents. The shark struck without warning, first targeting Constable Kumalo. The great white's powerful jaws clamped onto her left arm, the pressure nearly severing it at the elbow. The water immediately clouded with blood as Sergeant Mbatha activated his shark repellent device and moved to assist his colleague. Before the team could regroup, the shark circled back with startling speed. This time it rammed Detective Pretorius in the chest with such force that 3 of his ribs fractured on impact, causing his regulator to dislodge momentarily. Officer Radebe pulled him back as he began to panic, struggling for air. Sergeant Dlamini deployed an acoustic deterrent device, but the shark, now in what experts would later describe as an investigative feeding pattern, made another pass through the scattered team. Constable Govinder suffered lacerations to her leg as the shark's rough skin brushed against her during its charge toward Sergeant Mbatha, who narrowly avoided a direct bite by pushing his evidence collection case between himself and the predator's open jaws. Following protocol for shark emergencies, the team initiated emergency ascent procedures. Officer Radebe and Detective Pretorius ascended first, with Pretorius requiring assistance due to his injuries. Sergeant Dlamini and Sergeant Mbatha formed a protective barrier around Constable Kumalo, whose blood loss was becoming critical. Constable Govinder maintained a position slightly below, keeping the acoustic device active and monitoring for further approaches. The surface team, alerted by the emergency signals, had already called for air medical evacuation. As the divers broke the surface, crew members rushed to pull them aboard and applied immediate first aid. The shark circled the boat for 17 minutes before disappearing into deeper waters. All 6 divers survived the attack, though 3 remained in critical condition as they were airlifted to a hospital in Cape Town. Constable Kumalo underwent 12 hours of microsurgery to save her arm, though she would never regain full mobility. Detective Pretorius required extensive chest surgery to repair his shattered ribs, one of which had punctured his left lung. Constable Govinder's leg wounds, while less life-threatening, needed over 100 stitches and left permanent scarring. For the 6 officers, the physical and psychological recovery would prove lengthy. All received commendations for bravery, and their experience led to revised protocols for underwater crime scene investigation in marine predator habitats worldwide. Detective Sergeant Nkosi, who had authorized the dive, later reflected that in pursuing human justice, they had momentarily forgotten that they were entering a domain where humans were neither apex nor native, merely visitors in an ancient hunting ground where different rules apply. The morning sun rose slowly over Nosy Boraha, casting golden light across the lagoon where generations of local fishermen had gathered octopus, spearfished reef fish, and taught their children to swim. The water was calm that day, smooth like glass, with no hint of danger lurking beneath. For 4 teenage boys from the nearby village, friends who had grown up together exploring the reefs and tidal pools, it was the perfect morning to go spearfishing, just as their fathers and uncles had done at their age. They walked down the sand with wooden spears and small hand nets, laughing, bare feet wet from the tide, unaware that something had changed beneath the surface. Unbeknownst to them, illegal waste dumping from a nearby commercial trawler, done quietly over several nights and never reported, had caused something far more dangerous to settle into the bay. The rotting fish remains and meat waste had drifted along the currents and pooled in deeper channels, drawing in predators that rarely entered the lagoon, among them at least one large tiger shark. By midday, the boys were deep into the lagoon, swimming and diving for octopus near the reef shelf. They had already caught 2, their net half full, and were laughing about who would take the biggest share home when the mood shifted. The first scream tore through the stillness so suddenly and so loudly that it startled the seabirds from the trees lining the shore. One of the boys, the smallest, had been closest to the drop-off where the reef gave way to deeper water. He had just surfaced from a dive when a massive gray shape rose from below and slammed into him with terrifying speed. There was a splash, a violent thrashing, and then silence. He never reappeared. The others froze for a moment, unsure what they had seen. Just a blur, a shadow, maybe a wave. But then the water turned red and panic took over. One boy turned and began swimming hard for shore, his limbs moving in desperate, frantic strokes. But the tiger shark was already circling, triggered by the chaos and the scent of blood in the water. It came from behind, hitting the fleeing boy across the back with its snout before biting into his side and dragging him under in a spiraling plume of foam and red. The third boy, blood already streaming from a bite to his upper thigh, kicked weakly toward a jagged coral outcrop that jutted just above the surface. He had felt the shark brush against his leg once before it struck again, latching onto his thigh and shaking violently. Somehow the shark let go. Maybe his struggling knocked the shark off balance, or maybe it was distracted by the screams coming from the others. Either way, he pulled himself onto the sharp rocks, screaming for help, his blood washing down the coral into the sea. From the village, several fishermen heard the cries and ran to the shoreline. Within minutes, 2 small wooden boats pushed off, their outboard motors sputtering as they raced toward the spot where the attack had happened. The bleeding boy was still clinging to the rock, pale and shaking, his hands slick with blood and coral cuts. The water around him was clouded red and bits of broken spear floated nearby. One of the fishermen jumped in and lifted him into the boat while the others searched for signs of the other boys. They found one of the bodies quickly, drifting not far from where the shark had first struck. His back had been torn open, his body limp, and his arms still stretched forward as if he had been swimming when it happened. The second was found deeper in the lagoon, near the reef ledge where the currents were stronger. He was missing one leg, and the other was marked with jagged bite wounds, likely sustained while the shark was thrashing him back and forth. The fourth boy, the first to be taken, was never found. Back on shore, word of the attack spread fast. Mothers collapsed onto the sand, screaming their sons' names as villagers tried to comfort them. The wounded boy was rushed to the nearest clinic where doctors worked to stop the bleeding and stabilize him. He survived, but the damage to his leg was severe. Muscle torn, nerves exposed, and infection already setting in from the dirty water and bite. He would never fish again. The village, still in shock, gathered that night along the shore for a candlelit vigil. Families stood in silence, holding each other as the sea lapped gently at the beach, now forever marked by what had happened. Elders led prayers, and fishermen spoke of the old warnings, how tiger sharks were not to be taken lightly, and how changes in the sea's balance could bring predators where they didn't belong. The lagoon, once sacred and safe, had turned hostile, and the people knew something had caused it. Within days, rumors began to surface about a commercial fishing boat spotted dumping barrels offshore late at night, and although no officials confirmed it, Many believed the blood and rot had drawn the sharks closer than ever before. Locals demanded action, barriers, patrols, and protection for traditional fishing areas where their children played and their food was gathered. Signs were posted, and spearfishing was halted until further notice, but the damage had already been done. The lagoon, once a place of laughter and learning, now carried the memory of screams and blood, of a predator's shadow slicing silently through familiar waters. The survivors would never forget the terror of that day, and the village would never again see the reef as only a place of life and harvest. It had become something else, a reminder that even the most sacred waters could change, and that when balance is broken, the sea has a way of punishing those who forget its power. The remote coastline of Queensland's Cape York Peninsula represented some of Australia's most pristine and dangerous surfing territory by 2022. Emily had discovered surfing during her university years, where her engineering studies provided the analytical mindset that helped her quickly master wave riding techniques. Her profession designing offshore oil platforms required extensive travel to remote locations, and she often extended business trips to explore local surf breaks that most recreational surfers would never attempt to reach. The Cape York expedition in August 2022 represented months of planning, with Emily and 3 friends organizing a 2-week camping and surfing adventure to Queensland's most isolated beaches. The group had secured permits for camping in protected areas and equipped their expedition vehicle with emergency communication equipment, medical supplies, and provisions for extended wilderness travel. The break they discovered on August 14th, approximately 40 kilometers north of the area, offered perfect conditions. Consistent 4-foot waves breaking over shallow coral reef, offshore winds, and water temperatures warm enough to surf without wetsuits. The location's remoteness meant they were likely the first surfers to ride these waves, a privilege that came with inherent risks of being hours from emergency medical assistance. Emily's surfboard was a custom-shaped 68 inches thruster, designed specifically for reef breaks, with a narrow outline and sharp rails that provided exceptional performance in hollow waves but offered minimal flotation for emergency situations. Her decision to surf with this board would prove significant when she encountered a great white shark, which reduced her primary safety equipment to debris. The morning session began at dawn, with Emily and her companions enjoying 2 hours of perfect waves with no other surfers in sight. Water clarity extended beyond 20 meters, revealing intricate coral formations below and providing excellent visibility for spotting marine life. However, this same clarity would later allow Emily to witness every detail of the attack that nearly cost her life. At approximately 8:30 a.m., Emily was positioned 100 meters from shore, waiting for the next set while sitting astride her surfboard. Water depth measured roughly 4 meters, with coral formations providing habitat for fish species that formed the base of the local food chain. Unknown to Emily, this ecosystem also supported occasional visits from great white sharks following migrating prey species. The first indication of danger came as a strange disturbance in the water directly beneath her surfboard. Emily later described seeing a large shadow moving purposefully through the coral formations, its size and movement pattern unlike anything she had previously encountered during years of surfing in Australian waters. The great white shark that emerged from the depths measured nearly 4 meters in length, its massive bulk and distinctive triangular fin immediately identifiable as one of the ocean's apex predators. The shark's approach showed calculated precision that had made great whites such efficient hunters, rising from deeper water with increasing speed as it homed in on Emily's position. The attack began at 8:33 a.m. with explosive violence that shattered Emily's surfboard and launched her sideways into the water. The great white's massive head struck the board's nose section with tremendous force, its jaws closing around the fiberglass and foam construction with enough pressure to snap the board completely in half. Splinters of fiberglass and foam erupted from the impact point as Emily was thrown from her board into churning water. The shark's momentum carried it partially above the surface, revealing its massive size and rows of serrated teeth that had just destroyed her primary flotation device. Before Emily could fully process what was happening, the great white's jaws closed around her right calf with bone-crushing force. The shark's teeth, each measuring over 2 inches in length, penetrated through her skin and deep into muscle tissue, creating multiple puncture wounds that immediately began bleeding profusely. The sensation, Emily later reported, felt like being caught in a mechanical vise lined with razor blades, with the shark's powerful jaw muscles exerting pressure that threatened to snap her leg bones entirely. The predator's characteristic head-shaking behavior intensified the damage, tearing flesh and muscle as it maintained its grip for approximately 6 seconds. Emily's screams alerted her surfing companions, Marcus Reed and Sarah Thompson, who were positioned roughly 50 meters away when the attack occurred. Both surfers immediately began paddling toward the emergency, though their ability to provide assistance was limited by the continued presence of the massive predator. The great white released its grip on Emily's leg as suddenly as it had attacked, disappearing back into the depths with the same efficient movement that had characterized its initial approach. The shark's behavior suggested a classic case of mistaken identity, with Emily's surfboard silhouette triggering the predatory response before sensory feedback indicated she was not suitable prey. Left floating in increasingly bloody water with her surfboard destroyed, Emily faced the immediate challenge of reaching safety while suffering from significant blood loss and potential shock. The jagged remains of her surfboard provided minimal flotation, forcing her to rely on her swimming ability, compromised by her injured leg. Marcus Reed reached Emily within 2 minutes of the attack, finding her conscious but struggling to stay afloat due to blood loss and the severity of her leg wounds. His assessment revealed multiple deep puncture wounds along her calf, with several of the shark's teeth having penetrated to the bone and caused extensive muscle damage. The rescue operation required careful coordination between the 3 surfers, with Sarah Thompson using her surfboard leash as a makeshift tourniquet, while Marcus supported Emily's weight during the swim to shore. The shallow coral reef that had created perfect surfing conditions now presented additional hazards, as the injured woman needed to be carefully navigated through sharp coral formations without causing additional trauma. Reaching the beach represented only the first phase of a complex emergency response, as the group's remote location meant professional medical assistance was hours away by vehicle travel over rough terrain. Marcus's wilderness first aid training proved crucial in stabilizing Emily's condition, while Sarah prepared their satellite communication device to summon emergency evacuation. Emergency evacuation by helicopter required nearly 3 hours to coordinate due to the remote location and limited landing options near the beach. During this waiting period, Emily's companions maintained constant monitoring of her vital signs while using their limited medical supplies to prevent infection and maintain body temperature. The flight to a hospital provided Emily with advanced trauma care, including fluid replacement and pain management during the 40-minute journey. Emergency physicians had been alerted to prepare for shark attack trauma, ensuring appropriate surgical teams were ready upon her arrival. Surgical repair of Emily's injuries required 8 hours of complex reconstructive work to repair severed muscles, remove embedded tooth fragments, and restore circulation to damaged tissue. The shark's bite had narrowly missed major arteries and nerves, though permanent scarring and reduced calf muscle function would affect her mobility permanently. Emily's recovery involved months of physical therapy and psychological counseling to address both the physical trauma and emotional impact of surviving such a violent encounter. Her return to surfing came gradually, with initial sessions limited to small waves at crowded beaches where lifeguard services provided additional safety assurance. Every morning for the past 2 years, Geert Adrichim had risen before dawn, eager to slip into the cool waters near Gansbaai, South Africa, and swim the same 4-kilometer route that would soon test him like never before. A lifelong swimmer with a quiet passion for the ocean, Geert had trained relentlessly for his first charity swim, a crossing designed to raise funds for marine conservation and local schools. He knew these waters well. They were his backyard, a place of endless beauty where seals frolicked on the rocks and the sun glittered off rolling waves. Yet, like many who had come before, Geert also understood the bay's darker side, the presence of great white sharks, silent hunters that patrolled beneath the surface, unseen but always near. On the morning of June 15, 2013, the sea was calm and the sky cloudless, the air crisp with the freshness of winter turning to spring. Geert's family, his wife and 2 young children, stood on the shore, bundled in warm jackets and hats, watching as he prepared for his final training lap before the charity event scheduled for the following weekend. They had seen him swim this route dozens of times, admired his steady strokes and unshakable determination. Their quiet confidence made the sudden tragedy that followed all the more shocking. At approximately 7:10 a.m., about 300 meters from shore, the water rippled slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if disturbed by a swift movement beneath the surface. Geert was midway through his lap, steady and focused, unaware of the shadow moving fast below him. Then, without warning, the great white shark struck, rising from the depths with a force so powerful that it lifted Geert clear out of the water before dragging him down in a violent swirl of foam and blood. The roar of terror that escaped his throat was cut short, swallowed by the sea's vast silence. Nearby, a support kayaker named Thabo had been following Geert's progress closely, paddling steadily in the calm water. When he heard the scream and saw the sudden eruption of red spreading rapidly across the surface, his heart stopped. Thabo paddled faster than he ever had, reaching the spot where Geert had vanished only moments before. The water was churned, thick with blood and bubbles, but no sign of the swimmer's body. Thabo's voice cracked as he radioed for immediate rescue, desperation creeping into his tone. Rescue teams arrived within minutes, combing the bay with boats and divers searching for any trace of Geert. What they found were torn pieces of his wetsuit snagged on underwater rocks, and the global positioning system tracker he had worn on his wrist, now floating just beneath the surface. His body, however, was nowhere to be found. As hours passed and the search turned into a recovery effort, officials believed the great white had mistaken Geert for a seal, attacking with fatal intent. Despite extensive efforts, no remains were recovered, leaving the tragedy shrouded in uncertainty and pain. Back on shore, Geert's wife collapsed into the arms of friends and family as emergency crews arrived with news. Her children clung tightly to her legs, confused and frightened by the chaos unfolding before their eyes. The community gathered quickly, sharing grief and shock at the sudden loss of a man who had seemed invincible in his love for the ocean. The open-water swimming community was especially stunned, having followed Geert's training and admired his dedication and skill. His death was a cruel reminder of the bay's wild nature, where beauty and danger existed side by side, inseparable and ever-present. A memorial swim was organized a week later, drawing swimmers, family, and friends to the bay to honor Geert's memory. Divers formed a circle over the spot where he had vanished, their bubbles rising in quiet tribute beneath the waves. Small boats dotted the water, while on shore, candles and flowers marked a makeshift shrine. Though the ocean had taken him, Geert's spirit lived on in the hearts of those who loved him, and in the waters he had known so well. In the days that followed, discussions around safety and shark activity intensified. Officials reiterated that great white sharks were a natural part of the bay's ecosystem, playing a crucial role in maintaining the marine balance, even as they posed risks to humans who ventured too close. Many called for increased patrols, improved warning systems, and stronger community education about how to safely share the ocean with these apex predators. Still, for many who knew the bay intimately, there was an unspoken understanding. Its wild beauty always carried quiet, unquestionable danger. Geert's family, devastated yet proud, spoke openly about their loss, urging swimmers and ocean lovers to respect the sea and its creatures. They emphasized the importance of preparation, vigilance, and support during open-water swims, hoping no one else would endure what they had. The charity event went ahead with heightened safety measures, including more escorts and real-time shark monitoring. But the shadow of Geert's disappearance lingered in every stroke and every wave. False Bay, with its sparkling waters and rugged coastline, remained a place of challenge and wonder, a reminder that nature in all its majesty demanded both awe and caution. Geert Adrichem's last lap had ended not in triumph but in tragedy, marking a somber chapter in the story of the bay and the people who dared to swim within. The Red Sea's crystalline waters had sustained Egypt's coastal communities for millennia, but by 2021, illegal shark finning operations threatened to destroy the delicate marine ecosystem that supported both tourism and traditional fishing livelihoods. Omar Sharif Mahmoud, a 36-year-old freediving instructor from Hurghada, had dedicated his life to combating these destructive practices through direct action that often placed him in mortal danger. Omar's passion for marine conservation had developed during his childhood in the fishing village of Safaga, where his grandfather had taught him to dive using traditional pearl diving techniques passed down through generations of Red Sea fishermen. His exceptional lung capacity and underwater endurance made him one of Egypt's most skilled freedivers, capable of reaching depths exceeding 50 meters on a single breath. The formation of the Red Sea Rescue in 2019 provided Omar with a platform to channel his conservation efforts into organized resistance against illegal fishing operations. The group's activities included documenting violations, removing abandoned fishing gear, and occasionally conducting direct interference with boats engaged in shark finning activities. These operations carried significant legal and physical risks, as the criminal organizations behind shark finning often responded violently to interference. Intelligence gathered throughout 2021 indicated that a major shark finning operation was scheduled for the new moon period in November, when minimal lighting would provide cover for illegal activities. The operation, believed to be organized by a syndicate with connections to Asian shark fin markets, planned to deploy massive gill nets in the protected waters approximately 60 kilometers from Hurghada. Omar's team had spent weeks preparing for the intervention, studying weather patterns, identifying escape routes, and coordinating with sympathetic fishing boat captains who would provide transportation to the remote location. The mission involved cutting nets and freeing trapped sharks before the finning boats could harvest their catch, a dangerous undertaking that required precise timing and exceptional underwater skills. The assault team consisted of 4 experienced divers, with Omar serving as the primary line cutter due to his superior breath-holding ability and familiarity with shark behavior. Each team member carried specialized diving knives, emergency flotation devices, and underwater communication equipment for coordinating the complex operation in complete darkness. Departure from Hurghada occurred at 2 a.m. aboard a modified fishing vessel skippered by Captain Youssef, a veteran fisherman whose own livelihood had been devastated by illegal fishing operations. The journey to the islands required 3 hours of navigation through increasingly rough seas, with the team using the travel time to review emergency procedures and equipment checks. Arrival at the target site revealed the full scope of the illegal operation. 3 large fishing vessels had deployed gill nets spanning over 2 kilometers, creating a massive underwater trap designed to capture sharks and other large marine life. Underwater reconnaissance indicated that numerous sharks were already entangled in the nets, with some showing signs of distress that suggested they had been trapped for several hours. Omar's portion of the mission involved cutting the deepest section of the net array, located at a depth of 40 meters, where the largest sharks were typically caught. The operation required multiple breath-hold dives in complete darkness, with Omar relying on waterproof cutting tools and handheld lights to navigate the treacherous underwater environment. The first 3 dives proceeded successfully, with Omar managing to free 2 hammerhead sharks and a large reef shark from the entangling nets. However, the cutting process inevitably released blood into the water from sharks that had been injured during their capture, creating chemical signals that would attract other predators to the area. On his 4th dive, Omar encountered a calm patch of water away from the tangled nets before he began his work. Working methodically in the absolute darkness 40 meters below the surface, Omar began cutting through the heavy nylon lines that bound the tiger shark. His handheld light revealed the predator's distinctive striped pattern and powerful build, but also indicated that the shark was becoming increasingly agitated as the cutting process progressed. The shark's struggles had wrapped additional netting around its body, requiring extensive cutting work that would keep Omar underwater for the maximum duration of his breath-holding capacity. Suddenly, a massive tiger shark emerged from the shadows, not the one he was trying to set free. The ambush left him no time for warning. The attack began at 3:47 a.m., approximately 90 seconds into Omar's dive. As he worked, the hidden tiger shark from the shadows suddenly attacked with explosive force, its massive jaws closing around Omar's torso with crushing pressure. The shark's serrated teeth, each measuring over 3 inches in length, penetrated deep into his chest and abdomen, causing massive internal injuries. Omar's training in shark behavior had taught him to remain calm during aggressive encounters. But the severity of his injuries and the need to reach the surface for air created a desperate situation. His dive partner, Khaled Hassan, heard panicked underwater splashes, and joined by the other 2 divers dove desperately to pull him free. But the shark's power was overwhelming. The shark brought Omar deeper into the water, and their cutting attempts were thwarted by the enormous force of the tiger shark's thrashing. The predator's characteristic thrashing behavior caused additional trauma, as it shook Omar violently while maintaining its grip on his torso. The attack lasted approximately 30 seconds, during which Omar's blood created an expanding cloud in the water that would later attract additional predators to the area. Hours later, Khaled's team located Omar's lifeless body tangled in a torn section of netting roughly 20 meters below the surface. His emergency flotation device, damaged during the attack, had torn away, leaving his body to drift slowly toward the ocean floor. His wounds were too severe for any field treatment. The emergency ascent that followed violated standard decompression protocols, but represented the only chance of bringing his body back to the surface. Despite immediate medical attention from the team's first aid specialist and radio consultation with emergency physicians in Hurghada, Omar's injuries proved fatal. Omar Sharif Mahmoud's body was brought aboard the rescue vessel at dawn. His family was notified, and his funeral took place according to Islamic tradition later that day in Safaga. Though he passed hours earlier during the deep water ambush, his official time of death was marked at 4:23 a.m., once his body reached the surface. His death galvanized international attention on the illegal shark finning trade and led to enhanced enforcement efforts throughout the Red Sea region. The mission's success in documenting and disrupting the illegal fishing operation provided evidence that led to arrests and prosecutions of several syndicate members. However, Omar's sacrifice highlighted the deadly risks faced by grassroots conservationists who confronted powerful criminal organizations with minimal resources and support. The Red Sea Rescue continued their work following Omar's death, though subsequent operations employed safer protocols that reduced direct contact with dangerous marine life. Omar's legacy lived on through expanded legal protections for Red Sea sharks and increased international funding for conservation enforcement programs. The frigid waters off a coastal city in Namibia had always been notorious among local fishermen for their resident great white shark population. The Benguela Current brought nutrient-rich waters that attracted massive schools of sardines, which in turn drew the apex predators close to shore. On June 6, 2025, this natural phenomenon would collide catastrophically with human ambition when a Russian film production chose these waters as the backdrop for their high-budget thriller. Director Alexei Volkov had spent months scouting locations for his latest action film, seeking authenticity that computer-generated effects simply could not provide. The production company, Crimson Wave Studios, had obtained all necessary permits and hired local marine safety experts, but the allure of filming in genuine great white territory proved irresistible. The waters around a small island with a population of seals, cormorants, and other bird species just 12 kilometers from the mainland offered the perfect combination of dramatic coastline and predictable shark activity. The morning dawned overcast and bitterly cold, with water temperatures hovering around 14 degrees Celsius. Lead actors Dmitry Kozlov, a 32-year-old method actor known for performing his own stunts, and Svetlana Petrov, a 28-year-old former Olympic swimmer turned actress, prepared for what the script called the climactic ocean struggle scene. Both actors had undergone extensive water safety training, but neither had experience with predator-infested waters. The scene required Dmitry and Svetlana to portray survivors of a shipwreck, fighting exhaustion while clinging to debris approximately 200 meters from shore. 3 support boats formed a protective triangle around the filming area, with safety divers positioned underwater and marine biologist Dr. Heinrich Müller monitoring shark activity through hydrophones and underwater cameras. Dr. Müller had expressed concerns about elevated shark activity that morning, noting that his monitoring equipment had detected multiple large signatures in the vicinity. The production team acknowledged his warnings but decided to proceed, citing tight scheduling constraints and weather forecasts predicting worse conditions in the coming days. At precisely 10:47 a.m., cameras began rolling as Dmitry and Svetlana entered the water. The scene called for them to appear exhausted and desperate, struggling against each other for a piece of floating debris. Both actors wore full wetsuits, but their movements and splashing inevitably created the surface disturbance patterns that great whites associate with wounded marine mammals. For the first 12 minutes, filming proceeded smoothly. Dmitry and Svetlana performed their choreographed struggle with convincing desperation, while underwater cameras captured dramatic angles from below. The crew remained vigilant, scanning the water through binoculars and monitoring Dr. Mueller's equipment, which showed normal readings. The attack began without warning at 10:59 a.m. A massive great white shark, later estimated at over 5 meters in length, erupted from the depths directly beneath the actors. Security cameras from multiple boats later revealed that the predator had been stalking them from below for at least 3 minutes, rising slowly from the deeper waters beyond the monitoring zone. The shark struck Dmitry first, its powerful jaws clamping down on his left thigh with devastating force. The actor's screams pierced the morning air as the predator's serrated teeth tore through his wetsuit and deep into muscle tissue. The impact dragged him underwater, his struggles sending violent splashes across the surface as blood began clouding the water around them. Svetlana, initially frozen by shock, attempted to swim away but found herself directly in the shark's path as it thrashed with Dmitry in its grip. The great white's head swung sideways, its jaws snapping shut on her right forearm. She later reported feeling the crushing pressure of teeth grinding against bone before adrenaline blocked out the pain entirely. The safety team sprang into action within seconds of the initial strike. Boat engines roared to life as crew members began shouting and banging metal objects against the hulls, attempting to create noise that might discourage the shark from continuing its attack. Safety diver Marcus van der Merwe, positioned 30 meters away, began swimming frantically toward the scene while radioing for immediate medical evacuation. The shark maintained its grip on both actors for approximately 45 seconds, shaking them with the violent head movements typical of great white feeding behavior. Dmitry later described the sensation as being caught in a massive vice that threatened to snap his leg entirely. Svetlana fought back instinctively, punching at the shark's snout and gill slits until her wetsuit glove tore away completely. The combined noise from the boats and the actors' violent struggles eventually caused the great white to release its grip and disappear back into the depths. Both victims were hauled aboard the nearest support vessel within minutes, leaving trails of blood in the water that continued to attract the shark's attention long after their rescue. Dmitry had sustained deep lacerations to his left thigh, with damage to major muscle groups, but fortunately, no arterial bleeding. Svetlana's forearm showed puncture wounds from multiple teeth, with one tooth fragment remaining embedded near her wrist. Both actors remained conscious throughout their rescue, though Svetlana went into mild shock from blood loss. Emergency medical helicopters arrived within 25 minutes, transporting both victims to a hospital where trauma surgeons worked for hours to repair the damage. Dmitry required extensive muscle reconstruction and would walk with a permanent limp, while Svetlana faced months of physical therapy to regain full use of her arm. The attack stands as one of the most significant great white encounters in history, serving as a stark reminder that nature's most efficient predators cannot be controlled or predicted, no matter how much humans prepare or rely on technology.